Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everybody who's joining us today. I'm Rohitashwa Aggarwal. I look after the GBS Research at Everest Group, and it gives me a lot of pleasure to welcome you all in the episode two of our series, Conversation with Leaders. And I have with me today a very good friend and a seasoned practitioner in the GBS community, Jay Desai from Japan Tobacco. Sorry, uh, Jay, why don't you introduce yourself?
Thanks, Rohit. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of us who have joined. Um, I guess my story will sound similar in many ways to many of my peers, because, like many of them who have ended up leading GBSs across industries, I did not originally set out to do so at the start of my career. It just happened along the way. And I guess you could say that I was lucky enough to be in the right place and the right time to watch this industry grow from infancy. So I've been in the GBS space, I would say, about 19 years at this point in time, which also explains all the gray hair. I started as an outsourcer, so I was with Tata, in the early 2000s. That's basically where I cut my teeth in the GBS space. And then I was lucky enough to run global sourcing right as the whole GBS outsourcing wave was taking off. I've outsourced, I've insourced, and I've set up GBSs now at least in three different industries. Most recently at AbbVie, where I was part of the team that led the separation and the formation of the company, as it separated from Abbott. And I joined GTI about 3 years ago to lead the effort to set up and run their multifunction Generation 1 global business services organization.
Brilliant. And Jay, that's fantastic knowing how much time you spend on PlayStation and other things you do. Having found time to set up so many organizations, it's brilliant, and we'll talk more about that. Once again, to our viewers, I'm dialing in from New Delhi in India. And Jay, you are joining us from?
Geneva, which
Brilliant.
is nice and hot.
It's interesting how you say it's hot for you, while I'm in Delhi at close to 50-degree Celsius.
We are probably closer to 30, but Rohit, you have one thing that we do not have, which is the magic of air conditioning.
Oh yeah, you can't survive without that. So good, and will be. I see there are some joining us from Brooklyn. Will be good to know where you're dialing in from. So do share that. And today we'll talk about Jay's most recent adventure, where he set out to set up the GBS for Japan Tobacco, and not much before the pandemic hit the world, and it has been a very interesting journey since then, a very successful one at the same time. Jay, I know you are close to 2,000 FTEs. That's a very aggressive growth in a couple of years since you set out to do this. So let's talk about that, and I would just encourage all our listeners to keep asking questions by posting in the comment section, and do share your experience as well. uh, Jay, how did the journey for this GBS organization start? And what give us the give us some background, give us how it started and how it progressed in the last few years.
Sure. So we, I think in early 2019 through Q3 of 2019, we were forming, storming, and norming, right? We were basically creating the blueprint of what the GBS would be, where it would sit, what functions would go in. And oddly enough, we actually started the first of our many waves of transition in February 2020. And you don't get a prize for guessing what happened right after, right? So when COVID hit, we were about 40 to 50 employees, and today we are, as you said, about 1,600 employees across three brand new centers that we set up
Wow.
around the world, and across different functions. So we've got finance, we've got marketing and sales, we've got procurement, HR, supply chain, legal, couple of other functions added in as well. So we are truly diverse in terms of our geographic and functional spread. And 3 years later, when I look back and reflect, I mean, it's been quite a journey. We have successfully transitioned 600 individual transitions over this period, and all of it is on time, right? And some areas ahead of time. So it's touch wood. We are, when we look back, it's been quite the ride.
Brilliant. That's just amazing. And, we've been kind of along with our clients in this journey for many decades now, but especially in the last 2 years. And we know how challenging it has been. We have people dialing in from all parts of the world, Jay. We have London, Spain, India, Nepal, New York. So good to see a very global audience today. Jay, I'm sure it was not nearly as easy as you make it sound, right? It was not a very smooth journey, especially as you say you did 600 plus migrations. So what were the key milestones? And starting from right when the pandemic hit, what was the mindset? Did you think about, is this the really the right time? Should we rethink? And what kept you on the path to success?
Well, a couple of things, right, Rohit? As we started this journey and as this hit, I actually remember, getting my management team together and saying, let's come up with, some scenarios, right? How long does this continue? But the one thing that I would say that helped us, there are many things that helped us the most. But at that critical point, I would say the first thing that helped us was adaptability. GTI has been on a journey, towards driving agility, right, across, the agile mindset, the adaptive mindset, so to speak. So we said we trying to put some of that into practice, and we said, how do we adapt, our thinking, right? How do we adapt our planning, right? So that was the frankly the starting point. So we literally ruthlessly adapted our thinking and our plan across the next 3 years, right? What could we optimize, what could we redo, not do, etc. Because what I did not probably mention is that JTI is a very transparent culture. So at the start of the journey, we were very clear, what functions would go in, what that would mean for everybody, right? And there were, the commitments were already made. So we were very, very transparent. Every one of our employees knew exactly what was going to happen and when. So we had to adapt, you know and evolve, because we didn't know when this pandemic would end. So that was first. Second thing I would say is the tenacity of our people, right? The determination that they showed. And I don't mean just the people who sit within GBS. This is a broad, comment across every one of our GBS employees, but also JTI employees who sit across the world, right? These are people who are, are still adapting to the new normal, right? That the pandemic brought, right? Dealing with kids, dealing with sickness, right? And the day to day, and they were supporting us, lifting and shifting, the work out to our GBS centers. And last but not least, I would say would be commitment, right? Our executive committee was very, very committed to helping us be successful. So when we went to them with a recommendation and the rationale, around any of these elements, we got their blessing. And their blessing was not just overt. Many companies I've worked at, and I'm sure a couple of folks on the call might have some stories on this front, right? Where when sometimes executive committees say, "Hey, you have our support, our backing," and it's always in the background. Here, when the executive committee said, "Hey, we are behind you," it was visible. We not only they not only talk the talk, but most importantly, they walk the walk. And I see there are some former colleagues who are on this call, who probably recall some of these stories from earlier lifetimes.
Amazing. And I would encourage some of former colleagues and other friends from the industry to do share their experience, their journey through the pandemic, especially. Will be good to hear what worked for you and what did not. Jay, coming back, right? You mentioned about how you had a lot of clarity on the plan, transparency, and communication. and leadership buy-in, right? There was a lot of commitment. So that probably made it clear that pandemic or no pandemic, you are moving forward. But how did you adapt to the situation to really make it happen? So all these migrations happening remotely, largely to a large extent, as far as I understand. What were the changes you made, or what were the key decisions that helped you actually execute it and keep it on track?
A good question, Rohit. If you prior to the pandemic, if you I don't know, others on the call can share as well. uh, Doing this remotely was far and few, right? Doing any migration, any transition remotely was usually done for, you know, maybe a small portion. So, again, comes back to people, right? We have fantastic people, and with their support, we created methodologies where none existed, right? It's simple things like, the transition methodology. It usually means you land up together, you work together, you do your job shadowing, and then you basically transition, right? I mean, how do you do that here? Right. So we adapted our thinking, right? We created methodologies which did not exist. Onboarding, right? How do you onboard? We've hired all these people, most of them till recently had never met each other. So how do you onboard them, right? And most importantly, how do you create the culture, right? Across this organization that we have created virtually. And I missed out on one element, which was absolutely critical, as we were rolling, our plans out. We were very, very transparent with everybody, at the word go, right? We came up with the saying, you've got to put the fish on the table, right? However stinky it is, right? So
Hmm.
we were doing it, okay, right at the word go. And change management, was our probably secret sauce in that sense, right? We, right at the onset, we communicated and met with everybody, right? Everybody, the leadership team, and educated them. Here's what GBS is. Here's what it will mean for you. Okay, we convinced them to take a leap of faith, essentially. And then when pandemic hit, we were very open with them in educating them and talking to them about here's what we were going to do, right? And here's what it would mean for them. So change management was, I can't understate how critical it was. And I don't mean communication only, I mean the entire suite, right? Starting from change impact assessments, right? To basically rolling out the entire program. And it was all done remotely. And again, we had fantastic people helping us drive all of this.
Amazing. And change management becomes the one of the most important aspects. I cannot deny it. In fact, I'd like to share that we have just started a new research where we are analyzing how do GBS organizations build change management as a capability, right? And this is first of its kind study, Jay. Again, organizations like yours, many others, they have truly exceptional change management competency, but what is the methodology behind it? How can others learn from it? This is the study where we are going to analyze and find out. So I would encourage everybody who's dialing in today to take this survey. There is a link in the chat. You can take this survey, and over the next few weeks, we are going to collect inputs. And in the next couple of months, we are going to synthesize and come back. And everybody who takes this survey, we will share the complimentary copy of this report with you. But we believe change management is absolutely critical, much more important than ever, as the number of changes and the speed at which these changes are happening, it's just happening at a rapid pace. Too many things to grapple with. So look forward to your participation in this. We have a question coming in, Jay. Do you have a change management leader specifically for this transition, or is it something that you manage via a centralized team which looks into all types of change?
So we had both. We had a dedicated transition team and we
Hmm.
had a separate dedicated change management team, which, I suspect many of you know her, but Emma Beaumont joined us
Hmm.
as to lead our change management efforts. She's been on this uh, roller coaster ride with us for the last 2 odd years, and I can tell you that that team they have worked, between my transition team and my change team. I think they've truly worked wonders. Okay, working across all the many hurdles that were thrown at them. I mean, they made the impossible possible.
You were lucky to have somebody like Emma there, right? So makes it definitely makes it easier. Uh, so Jay, talk us through some of your experiences as you were actually trying to operate in that manner, keeping everybody along and making those migrations happen. You also said you set up three different sites, and a lot of that happened remotely. What challenges did you encounter? What were the more difficult ones to manage? I am sure there were many, but you know, what is it that you remember, and something that you wish you had done differently or you had known better, so our colleagues can learn from that.
I think that would take up the better part of the hour, if we but because there were a lot of learnings along the way. Okay, I think, philosophically, I believe that, failure is probably the best teacher, and we failed, but we failed and learned very very quickly, right? So we had hurdles in everything. We picked the locations, but those locations were literally holes in the ground. Okay, so those buildings were also being built up in the pandemic. We didn't figure out that, a lot of the supply chain issues that crept in would start hitting, things along those lines. Okay, so we knew mentally there's a chip shortage, but
Hmm.
none of us would have factored in that there's going to be a shortage of, windows, for example, right, or fittings, for so you don't expect these things, right? And my GMs, they did a fantastic job of adapting. My general managers in the three locations, they did a fantastic job of even adapting their thinking and getting into the details in terms of, navigating through some of this uncertainty. Hiring, right? We are not in some remote location. We are in very very difficult, uh, highly competitive talent markets, right? So even then, initially, we were like, let's approach it in a certain manner. But then we said, look, it doesn't work this way. We have to have a proper campaign. We need to have a employer branding, campaign, for lack of a better word. And we pivoted down to, in the immortal words of Churchill, you don't let a good crisis go to waste. So we said, let's use that, right? And we came up with a tagline: freedom to choose, right? Right, freedom to choose what you want to do, where you want to do it, etc. So again, we failed, but we failed very very quickly and recalibrated our thinking, right? Transitions, right? We realized that we were initially going in, to, certain countries more than once. Why do you do that, right? And we optimize our thinking along those lines. So again, the teams had together streamlined that. So there was a lot of learning, right, across every element, of building a GBS, right? From people, technology, right? We had no technology when we started, and then we came up with this whole mantra that we will basically use, essentially, if you're a new employee, you're joining us, wherever you are, you need to know how to find stuff, how to access stuff, right, how to request stuff. And we made that into a campaign, right? We basically rolled out service now. So basically today we've got 260 odd processes, digitized and accessible to everybody within JTI across the globe, where you can request any of these services from that service catalog, right? So we learned along the way, we experimented, right? And we moved very very quickly, right? Where things that worked, we we quickly, scaled it up. Things that did not work, we did not bother, and we, went in a different direction. So adaptability, right, was absolutely critical.
And Jay, were there things that worked in one place did not work in other? You were operating three sites together. So to what extent were you localizing some of the strategy versus operating with the same policies everywhere?
Well, interesting question, Rohit. Look, I'm a big believer, right, in, having, to me, GBS is a pretty unique construct. It's not a shared service, right?
Mhm.
Not just in terms of scope, but you think as one, right? you think for the broad collective, and then of course you localize, your thinking based on the local culture, local policies, etc. I would say that we've been pretty successful. We call it, so internally we refer to ourselves as one GBS, right? Uh, and it's worked out quite well. So we follow consistent policies, consistent org structures, right? So for example, our so this is another lesson learned in previous GBSs, that I've worked at. GBS used to sit in a deep dark corner somewhere, right? You are in a back office, you are totally disconnected, from the rest of the organization. Here we said we will include it, and it's an extension, of the main organization, which basically means job grades. So if you're a manager in a GBS, it's the same with the manager in the rest of the organization, largely set up so you can move across. So we already have a lot of that going, right? A lot of movement happening within the company
Hmm.
in these short 3 years. So I would say elements like those, have been very, very helpful as well.
And that's also become a very important aspect of the evolution of this you know uh, sector as well, right? GBS organizations evolving to be part of that broader enterprise, same strategy, same goals, same operating model, of course contextualized to what you do. You spoke about culture, Jay, and this has been a big challenge with organizations that were built and scaled much before pandemic hit, because the attrition rates have been on the higher side in the last year or so. Talent demand is at its peak. So, as you are circulating so much of your staff, how do you retain the culture in a remote working model? But for you, a lot of that was built in a very different style. It was built
Yep.
remotely. Share a bit more about that. How did you actually propagate and nurture that JTI culture, and how are you preserving that as you evolve?
Well, we are still learning, okay, on that front, because unlike many others, right, where you had a physical, delivery center, you had a physical GBS before you went virtual, we have the inverse of that. We started virtually, right? So, we knew we had to, again, to keep going back to the word, adapt, right?
Mhm.
So the culture element starts as soon as an employee gets an offer, effectively, right? So we do pre-onboarding. So, we use apps. So there's an app called Talbendo that we basically rolled out. So when you come in, it basically has, videos from key leaders, tells you,
Mhm.
about not just about the company, but why are we doing GBS, right? Who are the key people? And it also allows you to connect with your future teammates, right? So when you come in, you have been already been grounded on some of those elements. You have a onboarding buddy who joins you along, the journey as well. That's pre. But ongoing, right? We've made sure that we stay connected, right? We've experimented. So we used to do those check-ins initially, okay?
Mhm.
And we really, your weekend drinks, for example, right? Sorry, Friday drinks. But we realized that, by the time that comes around, people are quite tired. Okay, so we very quickly dropped that idea. We're like, okay, another meeting to go to. We shorten meetings. We keep, we have agile coaches, who basically help us through this journey, and they say, look, people need time back. How do you keep recalibrating your time, right? What meetings need to stand versus not? But we use a lot of these elements to drive what is JTI, right? When I say freedom to choose, what does that mean, right? So exposure, check-ins, small group coffees, okay, uh, town halls, making sure, and I forgot the most important one, which is right now probably the most oversubscribed channel that we have within JTI. So I'm not sure how many people are aware, but there is a version of Facebook that exists
Mhm.
for corporations. It's called Workplace,
Yep.
and we started experimenting with that initially. So we created communities, right? Communities by center, communities for all of GBS, communities by function, and very quickly we found, people were really getting into it. So when a new joinee comes, hey, introduce yourself, right? And there is all kinds of stuff in there, right? That you can imagine, and it's fantastic. Everybody gets to know a little bit about you, when you join the company. And then of course, there'll be welcome messages floating around. So by the time your first day comes in, You already been set up. There are at least a bunch of messages waiting for you, welcoming you to the company, right? And then we use every mechanism that the company has given us and beyond to collaborate with our teams. We did virtual town halls. We've done virtual parties. We actually had a, if you played around with Second City, I'm dating myself again. We literally had a version of that where we had a virtual year-end party couple of times where the whole organization would come in, and you had your little avatar. You could go into all your rooms, right? See the wall of fame for people who won awards, etc. So, it's still a learning process, right? We are still learning. I'd love to hear from people on the call, what they have seen work well, but experimentation is again key.
I think that's a very important call out. Experimentation is the key, and learning early and adapting to it. Uh, again, as Jay said, would love to hear from our listeners what worked and did not work for them. Uh, Jay, you remind me, just a couple of weeks back, we are starting to get back and do in person sessions. So we had our GBS Leadership Exchange roundtable where we invited our member clients all together in Bangalore, and this came up. The corporate Facebook platform, and organizations that don't have access to that, or there are firewalls, they're using versions of Yammer or other
Mhm.
versions. Interestingly, the conversation also went into the direction of control. Once you create these forums, how much do you control? And there were mixed opinions around, let's not control too much. There will be some conversations that might make some people cringe, some sensitive topics, as long as it is in certain boundaries of, professionalism and then the language and all of that. It's okay. Let people open up and interact, because that's what they do on water coolers or over other kinds of breaks. So how do you deal with that? How do you make sure people really open up and connect on these forums?
So workplace is basically our corporate engine. Our CEO was, I mean, he's pretty neat. He's a pretty cool guy. So he experimented with this and he rolled it out. I would say that our approach towards moderation is lighter, on the lighter side. So if you see, if I were to share a screen, I mean, you like anything, right? People sharing pictures of their pets, to their latest vacation, to what they're doing on the weekend, etc. But it just kind of, it's right now, uh, it's replaced the water cooler conversation to a certain degree, right? And what we found is, because people know it's in the corporate domain, people tend to self-select out. So you're not going to find stuff that you will find on Facebook getting posted here. Okay. So people tend to be pretty smart around what they put up, right? And they know
Hmm.
what's, you when you see the other posts, when you come in new and you see what people have put up, you tend to self-select, right? You know uh, what's kosher versus not kosher.
Good. And as you move towards start of the return to office, uh, different patterns in different locations, how are your teams adapting to that? How are your leaders adapting to that? Because then you set up the system in a different manner and you operated and onboarded everybody in different manner. How are people adapting to this change?
No easy answers there, and that is one where it's entirely, country by country. Because
Hmm.
if you look back, right, in Europe, I think it's frankly COVID's pretty much done, right? There are no masks or anything. But then you reflect back in, I think in Bombay recently, they started, masking back up again. In the US, again, depends on where you are. It's still similar to that front. So it's still here. I think overall, what we've agreed as a corporation is that we will get to 50-50, right? Hybrid, and then of course, beyond that, it comes down to, you know, managers, what they are comfortable with, and frankly, local legislation. Because as much as we as humans have evolved over the last 3 years in our thinking towards being in the office,
Hmm.
government regulations are not quite there, right? So I know I've had a bunch of questions coming in. Hey, but can we work from a different country? And then we've had to educate some of those colleagues that you can, but understand that there are tax implications that come
Yep.
into play. So you may want to rethink that discussion, because when the IRS comes calling on your door, it's not going to be a pleasant
It's not
conversation,
nice.
right? So it's, I think, again, it's still evolving, right? The whole approach.
So, and that's the interesting part, right? Everybody is learning wherever they are. So, as you look back, right, this is a very unique organization you have created. How are you, continuing to define the purpose of this organization? Anything that is changing, anything that is different, how you try continuing to communicate that value proposition you talked about to your employees, as now they have more options. Everybody is out, everybody can have hybrid job, purely remote jobs, or some may prefer in office jobs. So how's the overall value proposition of your organization evolving, both for your enterprise organization and towards your employees?
Good question, Rohit. So let me answer it in a couple of ways, right? So, number one, what we have been doing, again, I've got a fantastic management team, okay, and what we are always doing is pulsing with our stakeholders. What do they want? What are the things that we could be doing differently? Okay, so that feeds into the roadmap. The second thing is there are things that we want to do. Things that we've observed, that feeds into our roadmap. Then we
Mm-hmm.
look at our peers. We talk to folks like yourselves to figure out what else we should be thinking of, right? Are there any blind spots that we have not seen just quite yet? And the way we talk to our community very, very regularly. So we have regular broadcasts with our customers across JTI. And funnily
Mm-hmm.
enough, we have again experimented which platforms we use there. But again, workplace is the flavor du jour on that front. And we communicate with them that, hey, you told us you wanted to hear about these things. Here's what we are bringing back to you. And as part of the discussion, we also use it to educate them on the fact that the last 3 years has literally been about building the foundation. The journey begins now, right? That was the easy part, right? The transition to me, and again, folks on the call can feel free to debate this, but I believe that transition is just the beginning, and it's the easy part, right? Of course, you don't do it properly, you will live with it for the rest of your lives, on that journey. But our communication with our stakeholder community and even internally is, last 3 years is building that foundation, and we've built a pretty robust foundation. The next 3 years, what we call as GBS 2.0, is going to focus on a couple of things, right? First and foremost, how do we enhance the employee experience within GBS and within broadly within JTI, right? That's first and foremost. How does that then basically help us make sure that we are very, very attractive from a talent perspective, externally as well as internally? Again, the structure is set up so that we have that uniformity, not just across the three centers, within GBS, but across the whole company. We
Mm-hmm.
want that
Very
fungibility of
important.
talent across the board. And then lastly, how do we combine these two elements to drive value back to JTI, right? Beyond, what was initially conceived. So these three are what I call as our key guiding principles. And then within that, what we do is we've got multiple streams of effort that goes into what I call as GBS 2.0, which oddly enough, we've just launched.
Amazing. And as you speak about GBS 2.0, uh, we have recently published thought leadership on different GBS personas. So we are talking about, not all GBS organizations need to be same, but they
Mhm.
can excel in whichever persona they fit into, based on the purpose for them and the aspirations for that organization. So if we are offering a complimentary copy of this viewpoint to all our listeners today, there's a link in the chat that you can use to download this. Jay, you talked about those three areas, right? And one of them, employee experience. But let's talk about talent. Last 1 year has been nothing less than a war for talent. how have you tackled it? Do you think you have faced similar degree of challenges as others in the industry, or have you fared on the better or the worse side of it? So, what has it been for you, and how have you tackled it?
I'll give you the consultant answer, which depends. All right. Now, jokes apart, I think we've had challenges, but again, we've adapted. I think the talent market is super hot. Okay, and overall, what I mean, it's a good time, right? For most employees because there's enough studies out there. The balance has shifted, over to the employees in that sense. And when we started the journey, we said that look, we will have to have a very strong employee value proposition as we enter into these markets because okay, let's be honest, we are coming in late, okay, in each of these areas. So we picked locations where we had a large enough brand, a large enough presence as an employer that we could piggyback on. That was first and
Hmm.
foremost. Then we created a five pronged approach towards the employee value proposition. And again, this is where our people and culture, our HR organization has been fantastic. And there's been one differentiator also because unlike other companies where I've worked at, people and culture, the HR business partner, it's part with a dedicated team within GBS. Okay, so we have our own that report up within my organization,
Hmm.
and these guys were superb. Okay, so they benchmarked, right, and it's not just about pay, by the way, right? It's about obviously compensation, right? It's table stakes, making sure that we are attractive there, all right? Benefits, obviously, but culture, right? How do we basically create the right culture, the in an exciting workplace, right? So if you look at, I think that the video that one of my GMs has put up on LinkedIn, actually, I think all of them have. And if you see them and if you see the workplace, I mean, it's truly fantastic, right? We won awards for the office spaces that we've constructed, right? So how do you have a cool workplace, right, where people are excited about coming in, right? How do you have the right engagement? Because this is one thing that is truly different about JTI is, yeah, I mean, to be very direct, it's across many companies that I've worked at, uh, it's very light on politics. Okay, people genuinely care. So if you see somebody, when I it's the funniest thing, right? Because I learned it myself because there's been a call early on, and I must have been looking a little stressed out, or I don't know what I was looking like, and I got a call from somebody who was on the call. Hey, are you okay? Right? And it's across the board, right? If people can even sense that something is off, and people will check in. It's the little things that matter, right? So we differentiate ourselves across all of these elements, but I think the biggest strength is the culture, right? The caring element. It's truly special.
That's really good to hear. And we have a related question. Uh, this is about that given all these variations, in the culture by age, location, nature, of different employees, how do you ensure you create a very inclusive environment in the virtual world? You were talking about how people care. Are there more small things that you ensure happen intentionally that improve the overall, your attempt at creating that inclusive environment?
I would say it's a bit of both. It's some of it is organic, okay, based on so one of my centers, the workforce, it's and I'm probably rounding up, and Luda will probably kill me if I murder the numbers up, but I would say 90% of the population, it's female, for example,
Hmm.
but that's organic because that's the nature of the workforce in that center, right? But what we've done inorganically is we basically make sure that whenever there is a role at a certain level and higher, we make sure that there is at least one diversity candidate in the final pool. My direct reports is literally split down the middle at this point in time. It's 50-50, right? But you have to you can't count on an organic promotion of a truly inclusive culture. You have to enable it, right? And that's basically been our philosophy as well. And I know it's harder to do in a virtual world, but I've done this one trick that have, and I, if there are folks on my team who are on the call, they'll probably know where I'm going to go with this. What I found is you really need to make sure that people speak up, because on virtual calls, it's not always easy because cameras are off. You can't read the body language, right? So we make sure that a camera, and unless you got something, kids, pets, everybody are welcome, but we look at the body language, okay, and then we make sure that if there are a dozen people on the call, we go around, hey, did you have anything to say here, right? And we basically make sure that they get the opportunity to open up, and we as leaders make sure that we don't taint the conversation, right? We don't want confirmation bias. So the usual approach is, if there are 12 people in a call, we go through all 11, and then the leader goes last, okay? So we try to promote. I don't think it's perfect, okay? I think we need to be better at this, but again, we are learning and experimenting.
And these are simple things that actually make a difference. I can tell you, right, in research consulting, you're in the professional services, so we're always very conscious about everything. I think over the last 2 years, we've become very open to the fact that somebody is cooking food at home. There'll be all sorts of noises in the background. You talked about pets and family members walking in, so people know who's what's not just your favorite t-shirt or pajamas, but also your spouse, your kid, who walks in at what time. All of that has become
Everyone's
normal,
got cameos. Everyone's
right?
done cameos.
Everyone has a role to play. So that's become really good. But what I really like is the fact that how do we try to be on video? How do we make it normal to bring more participation?
And, and one more thing that I'm just reflecting back, and I don't think is unique to the pandemic and the virtual world. I'm a big fan of insights discovery. If you're familiar with that engine,
Hmm.
and when you plot it out, I'm actually looking at Rita's comments here, and I was reflecting back. We did it as a management team, okay, initially, and we said, hey, what's the distribution? Who's the extrovert, right? So if you're familiar with insights discovery, it's the four colors, right? It's red, get it done, then you have the yellow, like the more social. Blues are, we got to plan everything, and greens like show me you care, right? We make sure that we also have enough diversity of thinking along those lines, and the team loved it. So it's now actually, it's been over the last 2 years, we've been rolling it out, down to every manager effectively, right? I mean, that is one area which is right now oversubscribed, if I may say so. And what it does is it tells you that, look, you need to draw certain people out, right? So once then you make the extra effort to make sure that you draw the introverts out, and then they speak up. But it's as much of an art as much as a science.
Yeah, I think once there is intent and conscious effort, you cannot control everything, but step by step you move towards that goal. And yeah, the broader neurodiversity efforts have become much more intentional. So
Yep.
that's good to see. So Jay, this has been a pretty exciting journey. Clearly, what's yeah, you said this was just the foundation. So what's next? What's the next 1 year, 3 year, 5 year milestone that you're working towards? What are your teams working towards? What's the vision that you're currently defining in this, if I may say, you said GBS 2.0?
Same three guiding principles, right? But effectively, look, we are very, very broad. Okay, when you look at most GBSs, there are some combination of finance, HR, procurement. We are already much broader than that, right? So we obviously want to pick up more work. Okay, why stop at what we picked up? And we already shown that we can do it really well. I remember when we started with marketing and sales, I was told can't be done, right? You'll never get to, get the success on this front. We've done it. It's one of our most impactful areas. So we're looking at going upstream, right? uh, some areas we are already upstream. In finance, I can tell you we do things which most GBSs are still aspiring to get to, for example. But we also, ultimately, what we want to do is get a seat at the table. We want to be closer and closer to our customers that we serve, right? So there's a big push towards, customer intimacy and stakeholder management, right? So we are training our people on what is stakeholder management, what it means, and how do you basically, move your stakeholders along the journey with you, right? And then of course, adding value back, like in that area we are, again, I would say that we are a little oversubscribed,
Hmm.
because right now, before even our journey finished, uh, we have requests coming in from various parts of the organization asking for help with various projects that are going on, right? Which is fantastic. But a big push, is also to put some structure around it. So taking a page, I worked in IT for a long time, and taking a page from that, applying portfolio management concepts at prioritizing, capturing demand, prioritizing the demand for both GBS led and GBS supported projects, right? Initiatives, and then of course matching it up with the supply. So there's a, couple of elements, that we are focused on, because also we want our initiatives to translate into things that are measurable, right, and achievable, right? I mean, hate to get pedantic, but that's over a 3-year journey. We know what we want to do, and we know what needs to be done to get there, right? And that's what we are focused on.
Amazing. And what I really find fascinating is how taking inspiration from your, you know, experience in your previous organizations, what your colleagues have done in the industry, we are at a point where a 3-year-old GBS organization is thinking about portfolio not in terms of the number of FTs, but in terms of the value. You're thinking about measuring that value. You're thinking about your stakeholders much more consciously. So I think that itself is a big leap, and it's a big leap not just for the GBS leader mindset, but also the mindset of all your extended leadership team, delivery managers, site managers, all of them. So that's a big leap. I would invite Jay on your behalf, our listeners, if they have more questions for you, even after this session, those who will be listening in at a later time, to kind of post in chat or reach out if they have more questions. I'll take one more question from the chat, and I'll remind our listeners that, like as mentioned earlier, we have this GBS persona paper available. So there's a link in the chat. Feel free to download that. It's a complimentary. It's available on complimentary basis. The question I have here, Jay, is were you faced with situations where you had to prioritize between these business requests coming in from one area versus the other area? How do you go about that when you have a very strong growth rate? You talked about many business teams already reaching out for more requests, talking about where you support versus where you deliver. How do you make those decisions? What are the key criterias that you use?
Good question. So, well, I'll say it's maybe I split it into two parts, okay? Because when you get requests to support projects, right, that to me is a relatively easier element, right? Because these are typically, C-level sponsored initiatives. So we make sure that, hey, is this, you're asking us for uh, 8 people, to basically deploy this new technology in supply chain. We make sure that, hey, is it approved, right? Or is it basically something that you're still waiting on approvals on? So we go through
Hmm.
those basic checks and balances, okay? And then we've come up with an approach in terms of getting in early. So we typically tend to get in early enough in the planning cycle, so that again, there's room for improvement there. But for the most part, we are capturing the demand early. We go through the vetting process, saying, hey, was this approved by the right people? And then we plan accordingly. Where it gets complicated is on the operation side, right? And I think it's a very astute question, around prioritization. And we've had to do that pretty regularly, right? Because I mean, I would love to say that one area is more important than the other. Not really. They're all important, right? Every, and especially when you if you're on the customer's shoes, the stakeholder's shoes, everyone is important. But where we've gotten better over time is basically making sure that they can articulate properly. So what we do is we have a review board. We meet every week,
Hmm.
okay, and we invite them in. Whoever is a requester, hey, I want to change, right? I want to do this quicker. I want to do this slower. I need you to pick up more, and we have them come in and articulate, okay, why, you know, why is this right? What's the impact on others? And hey, I'm a Midwesterner, right? I've spent 20 years in Chicago, so we love doing everything by committee. So we basically have a group of folks, within and outside of GBS, and then we decide together that, hey, can we do this or can we not do this, right? And then of course we match up, our resources accordingly. We Again, what we've also done a pretty decent job of is educating people that if you spring a demand on me, overnight, it's not going to work, okay? Because we are in competitive talent markets, there is a lead time. So the better we get at planning and predicting, right? And it doesn't need to be accurate, right? I apply the 80-20 rule, right? As long as you're 80% there, directionally accurate, it's okay. We will manage. But early involvement, right, and creating awareness that we can do what you want, but A, you need to tell us why, and then B, be aware there is a lead time, right? Has worked. We are still evolving this. This is not fait accompli, right? There is still work to be done on this front. But I would say we are much better at this than we were 3 years ago.
Amazing. And once again, talking about your one of your success factors, change management. I'd like to remind everyone that the research on change management is ongoing right now. So feel free to take the survey. You'll see a link in the description or the chat, and you can take the survey, share your inputs, and we'll be happy to share back the findings with you. Uh, Jay, I think we have covered some of the questions. We'll take some more later on in the chat. It's like always, Jay. It's been an amazing conversation. Always good to talk to you. And on behalf of all our listeners today, I would like to thank you once again for taking out the time. Uh, of course, for all our listeners, we have the next episode 3 of Conversation with Leaders series planned. So watch out this space for more details on that very soon. And Jay, once again, thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Have a good day and good night, everyone.